Thank you. Sorry about that. I want to start by thanking New Mexico Border Authority for hosting us this afternoon. We truly appreciate the support your staff has provided. I'm grateful for the opportunity to hold this important hearing on land ports of entry at my hometown district. I wanted to extend my thanks to the witnesses who have joined us today to discuss the challenges we face with infrastructure, technology, and staffing at our ports of entry. We know this is a community issue, that the work that gets done at our ports of entry also impacts economies across New Mexico, and especially here in southern New Mexico. So I also want to thank the elected officials who have arrived today. Thank you to Mayor Ken Miyagashima in Las Cruces, County Commissioner Raul Gonzalez in Doñana County, Mayor Javier Perea in Sunland Park, Senator Mary Kay Papin and Representative Nathan Small. I think it's especially fitting that we have Senator Papin here in the Frank Papin building here at the New Mexico Border Authority. Of the 110 land ports of entry on the U.S. border, 3, Santa Teresa, Columbus, and Antelope Wells, are all in the district that I represent. Earlier this morning, Ranking Member Crenshaw and I had the opportunity to visit one of these ports, the Santa Teresa Port of Entry, just down the road from here. The visit was valuable to understanding the critical role the ports of entry and the Customs and Border Protection officers who staff those ports play in facilitating commerce and preventing contraband, such as illegal drugs from entering the country. Unfortunately, many land ports of entry have outdated infrastructure, lack technology to detect contraband, and suffer from staffing shortages. We saw that overwhelmingly today, the challenges that happen when you need a larger workforce to get the job done. For example, related to infrastructure, several ports of entry facilities are over 70 years old, and even those that are 15 to 20 years old are outdated and not keeping pace with CBP's current operational needs. In a July 2019 Government Accountability Office report, CBP officers identified poor conditions in existing facilities, insufficient inspection space, and design flaws that impede traffic flow. According to the same report, CBP's goal is to assess conditions at each CBP-owned land port of entry every 3 years. But it has not met this goal in recent years due to limited resources. This is a recurring theme that we've seen. Since well-functioning infrastructure is critical to effectively screen people and cargo and facilitate trade and travel, I'd like to explore how we can ensure these assessments are completed. Congress must fully understand the investment required to modernize our ports of entry. In addition to well-functioning infrastructure, ports require technology to effectively screen cargo and facilitate trade. A key technology for detecting contraband without slowing commerce is non-intrusive inspection, NII, systems. These systems allow officers to see inside a vehicle without physically opening it or unloading it. In 2019, recognizing the value of NII systems, Congress provided CBP with $570 million to install additional systems on the southwestern border. I introduced a bill last week, along here with co-sponsored by Ranking Member Crenshaw, requiring CBP to provide an implementation plan to Congress on how it is deploying and utilizing NII systems and how it is going to achieve 100% screening of all vehicles using these systems. By increasing NII scanning rates to 100% at all land ports of entry, we can guard against transnational criminal organizations shifting their smuggling operations to other ports of entry along the border, particularly rural and remote ports. Although technology can be a great asset, it is no substitute for hard-working men and women who wear the CBP uniform. According to CBP's workload staffing model, CBP lacks more than 3,500 officers. I understand from the union representing CBP officers that the Santa Teresa Port of Entry is understaffed, and CBP officers are having to work double shifts. This situation is not unique to New Mexico. This subcommittee explored CBP's recruitment and retention challenges at a hearing in March of this year. I know the agency has been trying to address the challenges through innovative means, but it is not a problem that will be quickly solved. One way that CBP is addressing staffing shortages is through public-private partnerships. Through these, entities such as private companies can pay salary and overtime expenses for officers to extend port hours. But we cannot use private investment as an excuse to delay critical job-growing investment that we need through the federal government. I'd like to hear more about how CBP is leveraging these partnerships and to what extent they are sustainable in the long run, given the overtime required of officers. I look forward to discussing how we can enhance America's land ports of entry, including those here in New Mexico. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Torres-Small, for hosting this field hearing. It has been great. It's great to be in beautiful New Mexico. Happy to be here, and thank you for working with me to find a suitable time so I could actually take part in this. I really appreciate it. I'm very, very glad to be here with you all. And thank you to our two panels of witnesses. I look forward to hearing your testimony, your expert opinions, and your recommendations. Customs and Border Protection estimates that approximately 11 million containers arrive by truck and another 2.7 million arrive by rail into the U.S. annually. On an average day, even over 350,000 vehicles, 135,000 pedestrians, and 30,000 trucks pass through the border crossing in the United States through the 110 land ports of entry. CBP is responsible for ensuring the cargo is not hazardous to the American people and that the appropriate duties on the products are collected. As members of the Committee of Homeland Security, we understand that border security is essential to our national security. We also understand the vital role that trade and tourism play in our economy. CBP officers at our ports of entry have a critical role to play in keeping our homeland safe as the front line of defense against terrorists and traffickers. They also have a critical role to play in ensuring that legitimate businesses can get the products that they need to operate. We must ensure that CBP has the necessary infrastructure, technology, and staffing to effectively manage our ports of entry. Infrastructure at the ports include processing lanes, buildings with agricultural labs, traveler processing areas, commercial facilities, and holding areas. Technology and tools to assist CBP include radiation portal monitors, radiation isotope identification devices, personal radiation detectors, radio frequency identification, and non-intrusive inspection technology. There's going to be a quiz on that after. All of these tools, in conjunction with appropriate staffing levels, allow CBP to carry out their mission. CBP is currently conducting a pilot program to utilize drive-through technology and facial recognition tools to manage traffic flow and reduce wait lines at the land-based ports of entry. CBP is working to incorporate the next generation of technology into its operations. Agents cannot always be in all places at all times, and the right technology gives them the opportunity to target resources. These tools can act as a force multiplier and improve our ability to stop nefarious actors before they enter the United States. As we face an increase in border trade and traffic, not only must we continue to seek to develop and utilize new and effective technology, but we must also have enough personnel to effectively manage the flow. In recent years, CBP has had trouble meeting its targets for staffing for its law enforcement entities. These staffing shortages create risks to national security, delay commerce, and put additional strain on a stressed workforce. The lengthy hiring process may be part of the problem, as it includes 11 steps and a background investigation, medical exam, and a polygraph examination. It was easier to become a SEAL. Okay, so the average length of time to hire an applicant in 2018 was 300 days for a CBP officer. Even the most dedicated individuals could be discouraged by such a long delay. One of the biggest barriers to bringing on talent in recent years appears to be the polygraph process, which appears to have an unusually high failure rate. To address this, I've introduced legislation to attract veterans, state, and local law enforcement and other federal law enforcement officers to CBP by allowing the polygraph to be waived for these individuals if they possess the appropriate clearances. I'm hopeful this will speed up the hiring process and allow CBP to get officers in place at ports of entry more quickly. CBP is responsible for protecting the safety and security of the country by preventing traffickers and terrorists from gaining entry through our borders. It is not an easy job. I have the utmost respect for the men and women who do this difficult job. And I want to make sure that they have the resources they need to purchase effective technology and update their infrastructure and attract and retain talent. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses on the best ways to achieve that goal. Yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Crenshaw. Before I introduce, other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. And before I introduce our witnesses, I also just wanted to thank Border Patrol for their presence here as well. As the Chair of Oversight Management and Accountability for the Subcommittee for Oversight Management and Accountability for Homeland Security, it's always encouraging to see collaboration between our men in blue and our men in green. So thank you both for sitting together. I now welcome our first of two panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Hector A. Mancha, Jr., who serves as the El Paso Director of Field Operations for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP. In this role, Mr. Mancha oversees the operation of 11 international land ports of entry in Texas and New Mexico, 3 airport operations, and 2 railroad crossings. He joined CBP in 1991 and has served in many roles since then, including Port Director for the Port of Hidalgo and Assistant Director for the Field Operations for the Laredo Field Office. Our second witness, Mr. Marco Grajeda, leads the New Mexico Border Authority for the state of New Mexico. As the director, Mr. Grajeda works to facilitate trade, job training, and economic development efforts along the New Mexico border. As a former staffer for United States Senator Tom Udall, he worked to fund construction of the Columbus Port of Entry and to extend hours at the Santa Teresa Port of Entry. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted into the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his statements for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Mancha.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Torres Small, Ranking Member Crenshaw. I'm honored to be here today to discuss U.S. Customs and Border Protection's mission to secure the nation's borders while facilitating lawful trade and travel. CEP operates at 328 land, air, and sea ports of entry across the United States and at an intercontinental network of 16 pre-clearance stations located in 6 countries around the globe. Based on fiscal year 2019 data, on a typical day, CEP processes over 1.1 million passengers and pedestrians, more than 285,000 privately owned vehicles, over 81,000 truck, rail, and sea containers, and approximately $7.7 billion worth of imported goods. The threat environment in which CEP operates is ever so dynamic and complex. Our adversaries continually adapt their methods to avoid detection and conduct illicit activities that undermine our economic and national security. Advanced detection technology is a force multiplier in the agency's multi-layered enforcement strategy. Our non-intrusive inspection systems and radiation detection equipment help us inspect conveyances and vehicles for contraband in a quick and efficient manner. CEP nationwide utilizes 320 large-scale NII systems at our ports of entry. In FY 2019, approximately 6.6 million NII scans resulted in the seizure of 203 pounds of narcotics, $3 million of undeclared U.S. currency, 1,655 weapons, and 200 undeclared passengers hidden within commercial cargo. We encounter operational challenges at all our ports of entry on a daily basis, none more so than the land port of entry at Santa Teresa, New Mexico. As commercial and demographic trends combine with infrastructure constraints to expand traffic volumes moving away from the El Paso, Ciudad Juarez urban environments, Santa Teresa nevertheless experienced continued growth in FY19 in all categories, to include a 10% increase in commercial traffic over FY18. In the past 2 years, the port recorded 40 separate seizures of narcotics with an estimated value of approximately $3.5 million. While we have experienced growth in our workload volumes and enforcement activity at Santa Teresa, our staffing levels at the port has remained static over the last several years, with under 100 personnel assigned to this location. Additionally, the operational challenges we face in FY19 related to mass migration surges require some staff from Santa Teresa to deploy to other locations. As we return our deployed staff back to the port, I'll also continue to engage with our headquarters to ensure the agency's workload staffing model accurately captures port data and that it appropriately reflects the current and projected growth at Santa Teresa and drives increases in staffing accordingly. As threats to American national security constantly evolve, CEP efforts to facilitate lawful trade and travel while safeguarding the nation's borders must also continually evolve. Investments in cutting-edge technology and infrastructure modernization and right-sizing our personnel are essential to CEP's mission success. CEP is committed to continued engagement with this committee, interagency partners, industry stakeholders, as we work through the efficiencies of our risk management efforts while maximizing security. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mancha. I now recognize Mr. Grajeda to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to address the subcommittee today, and welcome to Santa Teresa, New Mexico. I'm Marco Grajeda, the Executive Director of the New Mexico Border Authority, an executive branch agency that facilitates the development of infrastructure around the state's 3 land ports of entry. As a fronterizo with direct ties to the United States and Mexico, I know firsthand the importance of our ports of entry. Like many people who call this region home, I have family and friends on both sides of the border, and I've spent many hours at our ports of entry waiting to get from one side to the other. My background is unique to this area, where every day people cross the border for work, school, to shop, and visit loved ones. This is life on the border, and this is a key reason why our ports of entry are incredibly important to this binational region. In terms of trade, our land ports of entry are proving to be one of America's greatest investments. This region, for example, now leads the state in exports because of the work done here and thanks to the critical role of the Santa Teresa port of entry. Last year, exports totaled more than $1.4 billion, nearly twice as much as the larger Albuquerque metro area, which until recently held a comfortable lead in the state. Also, our neighbor city, El Paso, Texas, has seen tremendous growth in the last decade and is now on the list of top 10 export markets. It's important to note that the benefit of our land ports of entry extends far beyond the border region. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, 32 states around the country have Mexico as their first, second, or third largest export market. That includes states as far from the border like Ohio, Iowa, and Pennsylvania. While this growth tied to our ports is significant, more can be achieved with strategic federal investments. So what is needed? A major selling point for the Santa Teresa port of entry has been shorter wait times compared to other ports in the region. This continues to be the case on the commercial side, but because we don't have as many customs officers as we need, wait times have increased on the privately owned vehicle side. This needs to be addressed. And this is not something that the local leadership can fix because the region has simply not received any new customs officers in the past 7 years, even though the port has seen the fastest growth rate in crossings. New programs and duties were added, and despite losing 5 to 6 customs officers each year during that time. At the nearby Columbus port of entry, we recently celebrated the completion of an $85 million port of entry, but they also don't have enough officers to fully take advantage of the updated facility. Having more men and women in blue working in our ports will expedite screenings, reduce wait times, and encourage greater investment in the region. When it comes to infrastructure improvements, the port with the greatest need for federal investment in New Mexico is Santa Teresa port of entry, which is long overdue for a major expansion and modernization. As I mentioned earlier, this region is leading the state in exports despite inefficiencies at the port, but an updated crossing would further promote increased economic activity in the state and provide a much-needed reliever route for Ciudad Juarez and El Paso. As we work toward that goal, enhancements that facilitate the flow of oversized and overweight cargo, northbound and southbound, should be prioritized. This is especially true for oversized vehicles heading south that now cross to our port through northbound passenger lanes, essentially blocking traffic for several hours. Another priority project is working with Mexico to expand lanes on their side heading northbound to alleviate bottleneck issues. I also want to share that the New Mexico Border Authority is working to protect the area surrounding the Columbus port of entry from recurring flooding, which impacts port operations each year. We would welcome any assistance from this committee as we seek federal funding. And lastly, I will mention that the New Mexico Border Authority, we are working to take advantage of the federal donations acceptance program to pay for a containment site at the Santa Teresa port of entry. This would open the port of entry to new cargo, including medical equipment, airbags, and fuel. This project is a priority for the region and could significantly boost daily commercial crossings and make the region more attractive to businesses. I want to close by saying thank you again for being here and for holding this important field hearing. Like you, we are committed to working on behalf of our great binational communities and the many states that benefit from trade with Mexico. We are your partners on the ground, and we welcome your continued support. Thank you.
I thank all of the witnesses for their testimony, and I will remind each member, Representative Crenshaw in this case, that we have 5 minutes to question the panel. I'll now recognize myself for those questions. Director Mancha, Representative Crenshaw and I have recently introduced a bill to encourage CBP to increase NII scanning rates of commercial and passenger vehicles to 100% across land ports of entry to better stem the flow of contraband across the United States borders. You mentioned in your opening statement the importance of this technology. I understand that CBP plans on installing additional NII systems across the southwestern border after receiving $570 million from Congress in fiscal 2019. Do you know what the current NII scanning rates are for commercial and passenger vehicles at ports of entry under your jurisdiction and at Columbus and Santa Teresa specifically?
I don't know if I know the exact rates for specifically for the port of Santa Teresa, but I know that in general, for POVs, those vehicles coming in at our bridges, the scan rate is approximately 2 to 3% of all vehicles coming in. For commercial vehicles, the scan rate raises to about 15 to 20% on average. That's what we're basically seeing as the scan rates utilizing our NI technology.
Thank you. That sounds like your POVs are actually above the national average, which is only 1%. So I appreciate you working to do that. Have you received any information from National about how CBP is planning to use the $570 million to increase NII scanning rates?
I know that there's currently a pilot on the upgrading of the NI systems occurring at another AOR, South Texas. They're trying different new technology for this NI technology. Based on those results and those assessments, once those assessments are completed, then we'll realize what type of systems we'll be acquiring. So we're expecting that assessment should be completed pretty soon here.
So you haven't received any specific information about how that money might be invested in Santa Teresa or in your area of operation?
Not specifically. We have had a couple of visits from NI headquarters. The NI director, Mr. Watt, coming down. He did visit my AOR, and he visited the ports both at El Paso and here in Santa Teresa, and looking at different assessment feasibilities and trying to figure out, where would be best to situate this new equipment.
Great. What actions, if any, is CBP taking to ensure the safety of travel and trade at smaller ports of entry like Santa Teresa and Columbus, as scanning rates are increased at larger ports of entry and criminal organizations might act to avoid those operations?
Well, CBP has a multi-layered enforcement strategy. It means that we use all the tools in our toolbox. So we might be doing pre-primary roving to scanning those vehicles. We have our canine handlers, our officers roving with the upcoming traffic. We also utilize all our databases. When cars approach our primaries, they do run through our computer systems and trying to vet these people. So that's part of the layered enforcement. We did install a sea portal at the Port of Santa Teresa in the later part of 2018. So that was an increase of our NI technology. Of course, it also requires more resources to utilize it. So we're working on trying to get more resources and more certified officers to utilize that equipment and trying to run more of these vehicles through that equipment.
And just to underline that, so more resources means more training, more officers, so that you can operate the technology.
That is correct.
Thank you. I want to shift more to additional infrastructure at the Santa Teresa Port of Entry. I appreciated in your comments that ports need to continue to evolve with changing demands. And Mr. Grajeda, you mentioned the interest in the hazmat opportunity. Can you describe a little more the impact that would have for this region?
Sure. So the hazmat containment site that we're requesting state funds for would essentially open the port of entry to cargo such as fuel, medical supplies, other things that essentially right now are limited to one port of entry, the Isleta Zaragoza port of entry in El Paso, which is already at peak in its capacity. So this project, essentially opening, this traffic at the Santa Teresa port of entry, would create a reliever route for this cargo that's essential to our industry, and it would also open up additional investment. Each year we hear from industry that there is interest in a company moving to this area, but they want to be located near a hazmat ready port of entry because we don't have a hazmat port. Those companies aren't investing here, and so we're losing money, we're losing jobs in this area.
Thank you. Mr. Mancha, does the Santa Teresa Port of Entry have plans and to pursue this effort?
Absolutely. I do think that it is a great opportunity to expand the opportunities that the port can offer. But we want to make sure we do it right in terms of making sure that we get with all the appropriate authorities so that when we do open up the port for hazmat, that make sure that all those boxes have been checked off and ensure that we can do it in a safe manner.
Thank you. And just last question before I shift over to Congressman Crenshaw. For either of you, can you describe any additional challenges that infrastructure deficiencies at Santa Teresa has had when it comes to the flow of commerce?
Well, I'm going to start off by saying that with the recent migrant surge, and having to deploy officers to address that, that definitely has an impact to the flow of commerce. When I've got to deploy officers either to Border Patrol or we deployed some to the West Coast earlier last year, and so that has a impact to our ability to open more lanes, the amount of how traffic flow is moving. So you actually start generating longer wait times because of those deployments, and so that has had an adverse impact on commerce.
Thank you. I'm out of time, so I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw, for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, thank you all for being here. Director Mancha, I'll begin with you. In your testimony, you mentioned that CBP and GSA have obtained funding to begin land POE modernization. I was just curious what specific improvement projects are planned for Santa Teresa and nearby El Paso, if any.
So, that any major capital improvement is a long, drawn-out process. And so there is plans for expanding our passenger secondary here at the Port of Santa Teresa. That has been in the works. My understanding is that CEP facilities has approved. We're just waiting for the approval of the budget and trying to move forward with that particular project. Okay. There's also plans on trying to modernize the Bridge of the Americas in El Paso. I know that is already within the plans for CEP and GSA.
Okay. Can you expand a little bit on what you've heard from that pilot program in I believe it's in Brownsville, on the drive-through, the drive-through technology that's being piloted there, and does it seem promising? Have you had the chance to see it for yourself?
I've only been briefed on it, and I think that there's several ports, not only the Port of Brownsville, I think Brownsville, Hidalgo, I think even the Port of Progreso, and even perhaps the Port of Laredo. Mm-hmm. They're trying different systems, and particularly the drive-through system, and trying to see if it meets our needs. It's obviously, if it does, we will see some definite efficiencies, reducing the scan rates from 8 minutes to a minute or so. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that there is promising there. And so that pilot's been going for a while, so I would make the assumption that we should be hearing something back from that assessment.
Okay. So, I mean, part of this challenge is technology-driven. That's why we're doing these kind of pilot programs. And the other part of that challenge is, the vacancies that we have in CBP and how to address those. So I want to expand on that conversation a little bit. In my opening statement, I talked about are asking the question really, what is preventing us from hiring more CBP officers? Polygraphs are one of them. And well, maybe you could just answer that without me leading you to the answer. But what are your challenges in hiring more CBP officers?
I think that one of the challenges that we had, and we made a change back in 2015, was that when we started doing the CEP vacancy announcements, there were geographic-based, broad-based, versus more port-specific. And so now by changing the way we recruit, Port-specific has actually brought us a better qualified pool of applicants. So we've been able to make some headway with our recruitment efforts. And so I think that by the end of this year, we were only short 107 CEPOs in reaching CEP field operations up to their authorized staffing levels.
In this region or nationwide?
That figure is nationwide.
Okay. So then, is it inaccurate to say that there's 1,600 vacancies for CBP officers? What is that?
I think that where the confusion lies is that you have the onboard, and then you've got the authorized. Those are appropriate funded positions. Then you have the workload staffing model numbers, and so there's a gap between that. Right now, we're trying to reach the authorized staffing levels. And when I say that we were 107 short, I was talking about the authorized appropriate positions. And so now the workload staffing model, which is an analytical tool that CEP uses to try to justify the number of vacancies, there is still a gap there. And so when we talk about that, there's a need for more CEPO officers. That's the gap that we talk about. And so that would require appropriate funding in order for us to move forward and get those additional positions.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. So for the funding that you have now, you're short about 100, but the reality is when it comes to the duties that you're expected to commit to, you're short 1,600. That's more accurate?
That is more accurate.
But you would need to somehow hire those people, get them onboarded, and get funded.
Correct. The staffing levels do not actually represent the changes in the workload we've encountered here the last couple of years.
Okay. So again, going back to the challenges, though, so whether it's 100 or 1,600, we're still short. And by the way, I don't see a timer, so you're just going to have to cut me off when you're just you'll throw something at me, wave at me on my blind side. Where was I? So the challenges, though, I mean, so the recruiting, it sounds like you're optimistic about recruiting. So you get people interested in becoming a CBP officer, but then how is the process? And this is what concerns me, is this process of 300 days. And, again, I brought up the polygraph because, I don't need a polygraph to get a TSSCI clearance in the SEAL teams. And that's pretty amazing, but you need one to be a CBP officer. And I understand that there's some theories behind that, but maybe you could speak to that a little bit in the necessity of that, whether that makes sense or not. And also tell me, how often do you go through a polygraph once you're already onboarded as a CBP officer?
So I do think that the polygraph requirement came out of the Anti-Voter Corruption Act of 2010. And so I have noted that we do get a better recruitment, a better applicant coming in. And I know it is one of the hurdles. And so we've also have worked on trying to streamline the entire hiring cycle. You mentioned 300 plus days. I think that has been reduced significantly. And so we've made very significant improvements in that regard. Yeah, you talk about the need for the polygraph. And I would tend to agree that there are certain applicants that already have been in either in a law enforcement position, coming from the military and so forth, that perhaps would give rise to perhaps giving them a waiver of that polygraph requirement. But I do find it very beneficial that we do got to ensure that we do have the right people coming into the agency.
I'm probably out of time. Okay.
But we can do another round if that works. We can do another round if that works. Okay, great. I want to pick up where my colleague left off in terms of staffing, because I appreciate you bringing it up. Staffing is already a challenge. In fact, the numbers that we've received from NTEU is actually higher, 3,500 shortage CBP or customs wide. So there's certainly a need, whether it's 100, 1,500, 1,600, or 3,500. And then that comes under even more pressure when we face a crisis like the crisis we faced earlier this year. And so I just want to check in about the impact that had on operations here. Did reassignments affect wait times for passenger and commercial vehicles this last year?
Absolutely. Anytime you deploy CEP officers, there is a significant operational impact to the service that we provide at the ports of entry. And so, especially at a port the size of Santa Teresa, any movement of personnel definitely service would be impacted.
Mr. Grajeda, you talked about the short wait times being a major selling point for Santa Teresa. What impact do staffing shortages have on generating revenue and promoting job growth for the state of New Mexico?
Well, if we have shorter wait times, industry needs to have short wait times in order to be able to respond, in order to provide the material that they need to ship in a timely manner. If they're not able to do that, then they're not going to look at investing in this region. Obviously, when we're looking at on the retail or tourism side, if people are spending 2-3 hours at the port of entry, that's going to discourage people from coming over. I mean, in the border region, we depend a lot as well. We talked a lot about trade, but we also depend a lot on consumers from Mexico coming over and buying, shopping at our local shops, going to local restaurants. If you're spending 2-3 hours, it's going to discourage people from coming over. So our region depends on having efficient, timely ports of entry. This encourages economic development. To the contrary, if we have long wait times, it's going to discourage economic development in the region.
Thank you, Mr. Grajeda. And Director Mancha, how many additional CBP officers would be needed to keep all 4 lanes open at peak times to reduce wait times?
The workload staffing model projects that the total number of CAPOs should be 99. We're currently in the mid-80s.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to shift just briefly to the hours of operation. There's been another change in Santa Teresa's hours earlier this year, and that included closure at its commercial lanes on Saturdays. Now, I understand that this is a delicate balance, and it requires full input from all stakeholders so that you can identify what's best for the port, what's best for the surrounding community, as well as all stakeholders involved. So in some of the testimony that's going to be submitted today, Adele has expressed some current concerns with some of those changes. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how those decisions were weighed by the port, Santa Teresa Port of Entry, to find the solution that you came up with.
Like I mentioned, that during the peak of the mass migration, which required us to deploy our CEPU officers to help our brothers and sisters in Border Patrol here, required us to move some of the staff from Santa Teresa in regard to CEPOs. And so, of course, I talk about anytime there's a movement of these CEPOs, there's an adverse impact to the service, which would be even processing POVs or commercial traffic. And so, realizing that there was an impact, we saw a significant increase in wait times. And so, we need to engage the stakeholders and try to come up with some solutions. Get the stakeholders involved in trying to come up with some reasonable alternatives on trying to address the situation that we had at hand. And so it was decided that we would reduce the hours of commercial processing on Saturdays and opt for opening earlier Monday through Friday. That was the 2 hours. It was 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. That was a window that was not being utilized. And as a consequence, and there was a positive result that came out of it, is that we've seen that during this time that we've opted for this change, we were processing around 300 trucks a day. That has almost doubled. So we're almost seeing 600 trucks coming in Monday through Friday. So the 2 hour expansion of window Monday through Friday, paid off, huge dividends. And when we compare to having to shut down operations on Saturdays.
In a world with sufficient staff, would it be beneficial for Santa Teresa to have extended business hours to return to those Saturday operations as well?
Absolutely. Everything's based on workload. When we did finally make the decisions, where do you cut, is we also look at, where is your peak hours, where do you see the least number of traffic, in this case, looking at commercial. And so in trying to make these decisions, some of those factors are weighed in trying to come up with a viable solution.
Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time and recognize Ranking Member Crenshaw for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to ask about the reimbursable services program and then donations acceptance program and how that might be utilized. It's a really interesting concept, and maybe I'll direct that to both of you, starting with you, Director Mancha.
the reimbursable service program is a program where third party can reimburse CEP for enhanced service. What I mean is that it's not to supplement, it's to enhance. I'll give the example is if I normally open X number of lanes, I've got to go beyond that. And normally we've realized that that has been a huge force multiplier for us in trying to expand the number of lanes. I know that we do have that at the Port of El Paso, with the City of El Paso, participating. In regards to the donations acceptance program, also we have the authority to request from third parties donations of real property, donations, and trying to make improvements at the ports of entry. And so I think that gives CEP ability to be nimble in trying to affect some improvements in a rather short period amount of time.
Have you been able to take advantage of that yet?
Right now, we're actually working with a particular company here at the Port of Santa Teresa and trying to make some improvements within the commercial facility that would actually help facilitate moving their commodity through the port of entry.
Right. Yeah, I think we're going to hear from them later. And Mr. Grajeda, there's, you talked about the hazmat issue before, and all these businesses that wish they could deliver hazmat goods through the port of entry. I mean, what's to stop them from helping out and putting the infrastructure in place there themselves? I mean, that seems like the flexibility that this kind of program provides. Is anybody talking about that?
I don't know if the businesses have been approached directly. I think that's an opportunity that we can look at. As far as a state, we want to be a partner in getting this up and running. When you're talking about the donations acceptance program, I think one of the benefits is that we can get these improvements in a much faster way than having to wait for the federal government. For us,
are you saying we're not fast and efficient? Is that what you're implying? Just kidding.
No, we might be a little bit faster. That's all I'm saying. But for us, we see it as a small investment. It's a relatively small investment for a high reward, and it also adds to a layer of safety at the port of entry, which we see as beneficial.
And this is for both of you again. How does the private sector made aware of these programs?
We do actually at monthly trade meetings, introduce a program. We've actually had the program manager from headquarters come down and actually give presentations on these particular programs.
Yeah. Okay. Is at the state level? Is there a way to make chambers of commerce more aware of this? And
I think the port meetings that we've had through the trade industry meetings have been really helpful. They bring staff from headquarters level to talk about the different programs. Certainly we can reach out more. We recently we renewed our port advisory meetings here at the New Mexico Border Authority, which is another venue that we plan to take advantage of, talk about these different programs.
Right.
But the trade meetings that the Customs and Border Protection hosts have been really effective in getting the word out.
Great. And Director Mancha, I want to change the subject really quick to human trafficking and smuggling, and how we can improve detection of that horrible crime. What you're seeing, are things improving on that front, and does the new technology that we've been discussing potentially help with that?
I think that the technology would definitely help in terms of trying to address that, but really don't see too much of the human smuggling occurring at the ports of entry. You do see people coming in fraudulently, as imposters and so forth. Mm-hmm. But in regards of human trafficking, human smuggling, we don't see too many of those cases. And so I think that...
You're saying that would be between ports of entry, not at the points of entry?
I'm not familiar if that is indeed what Border Patrol is seeing. Yeah. Again, we do see a lot of imposters and people trying to come in fraudulently, but that wouldn't be in the category of human trafficking.
Right. Okay. And because you mentioned some of the NIIs, you see, you see detected passengers with some of the technology, and so, but you're saying that's not necessarily human trafficking. That's probably just fraudulent
Correct.
Right, okay.
And we actually had one this past week. We had somebody actually coming in a vehicle in the trunk, but it's it's either a relative, somebody trying to bring somebody in. That wouldn't be considered as human trafficking.
Right.
And they're trying to smuggle them in. But and then of course you do see folks trying to get in with posing as parents when the kids
Right.
aren't theirs and so forth.
Right, and which would be considered somewhat human trafficking. When I talk to Border Patrol, they see these kind of things all the time, and so, does the on the customs side, do you get the training that you think you need to be able to detect those signs of human trafficking? Because it's not as if these people are shackled in the back. That's not how it works.
And this will be the last question.
Okay.
We're about a minute over.
Sometimes it's there's mental manipulation that occurs, or they're posing as parents or something else. So, do you think you get the training you need to detect those kind of things?
We can always use more training. I'll never pass on additional training, but I do think that a lot of the experience that the DEP officers have in their line of questioning and their observational skills. The review of the documents, all those skill sets come into play in trying to determine whether this is a legitimate family unit. Are these people say who they are? And so I think that our officers do get that experience, especially at a port with a lot of volume. But we would never bypass additional training.
Thank you, Ranking Member Crenshaw. Thank you both for being here today and providing your testimony. I deeply appreciate it.
Thanks.
I'm now going to welcome our second panel of witnesses and thank them for joining us today. I was wondering if I needed to press it or something, but it just, and then it just stopped. But I never saw it actually count down from 5. Yeah, it just said 5. I'm keeping it on my, but I can write notes to you, I guess. Okay. Thank you both for being here today. I'll now introduce our next panel of witnesses. Our first witness on this panel is Mr. Jerry Pacheco, who is the founder and president of the Border Industrial Association. He has a long and respected career working with international trade in our state, establishing New Mexico's first foreign trade and tourism office in Mexico City, and serving as the executive director of the International Business Accelerator, the only statewide international trade counseling program. Our final witness is Mr. Felipe Otero, the logistics manager for TPI Composites. Mr. Otero has a degree in mechanical industrial engineering and has worked in procurement and logistics for over a decade. TPI Composites is the largest U.S.-based independent manufacturer of composite wind blades and frequently transports these blades through the Santa Teresa port of entry. We saw a few today. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Pacheco.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you for the invitation. As you mentioned, I am the Executive Director of the International Business Accelerator, and I'm also the President of the local industrial base here, the Border Industrial Association. We have more than 100 members. Most of the businesses you see around here are our members. Most are involved in manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution. We represent about $2 billion in investment, private investment here, about 5,000 jobs, and an export base to Mexico of about $2 billion. Our organization works to improve the business environment here and to recruit new industry to this area. So I've been involved with the Santa Teresa Industrial Base for almost 29 years. Before the Santa Teresa Port of Entry was opened in 1993. I've seen this base grow from 4 buildings to 4 industrial parks that house more than 60 companies. Our little antiquated Port of Entry has grown from a remote, obscure facility to the 5th most important export port of entry on the entire U.S.-Mexico border. All of this development around us and immediately to the north would not be here if the federal government had chosen not to invest in the port. During the past 10 years, New Mexico has at times led the nation in export growth percentage. In 2014, New Mexico's export growth percentage to Mexico increased by 39%. That was the highest of any state in the nation. In that same year, the Las Cruces Metropolitan Statistical Area, which we're part of here in Santa Teresa, led all MSAs nationwide in the export growth percentage increase. This increase in trade was due to the industrial base that we've established here in Santa Teresa to supply production inputs to Mexico's manufacturing sector. This symbiotic relationship has allowed us to attract investment to a region and to create good paying jobs. Down here, we don't view Mexico as a nemesis or a problem. It's a neighbor, a partner, and one of the strongest economic opportunities that our country has. We don't look at the border as a barrier that separates us, but rather a place that brings our two countries together. And ports of entry are the portals that make that happen. Our trade relationship with Mexico helps our companies and ultimately our country to remain competitive in the global market. Investing in ports of entry facilitates trade, which increases revenue via investment and employment, thus ultimately adding to the coffers of the U.S. in general. This is a much wiser investment than a full border-long wall. Walls are needed where they're needed in urban areas and places where illegal crossers can quickly blend into the general population. However, as we know, the immigrant crisis that we're currently experiencing doesn't have primarily to do with illegal crossers scaling walls or trying to cross in the desert where there's no barriers. Rather, the crisis is occurring in our ports, at our ports of entry, where migrants come to surrender themselves in hope of being granted asylum. When large waves of immigrants approach a port of entry, the port director has the discretion to shut the facility down for security reasons. Although ports of entry don't typically stay closed down for very long, any closures will result in traffic piling up on both sides of the border. This is highly disruptive to the flow of people and cargo, causing inefficiencies and a drop in productivity for companies on a tight supply chain. Congress must address amnesty laws to prevent future migrant crises such as the one we're currently experiencing. Waves approaching ports of entry cause major problems. Asylum seekers have to be taken into custody, documented, physically examined by medics, fed and housed at the ports until a more appropriate space is found to keep them until their hearing. This takes CBP officers out of their posts to perform these functions, resulting in commercial lanes being shut down, thus causing long lines, delays, and a discouragement of investment, which is really important to us here. Even more important than infrastructure is the human element, as we were discussing here, namely the CBP officers that protect the U.S. and who are also an integral element in the U.S.'s trade with countries such as Mexico. There's a gap between the number of CBP officers needed and how many are actually being recruited. We actually have a 559 program pending in place here to pay for overtime of officers, but that's irrelevant to us because if they don't have sufficient officers, we can't pay them overtime. So to extend the port hours, it's kind of a catch-22. So when a CBP prospect is recruited, he or she will have to go through an extensive training period. After this is over, an agent will still need to shadow an experienced CBP officer for at least a year, after which the new CBP officer will finally be available to fully functional in his or her position. Depending on the traffic, strategic importance, and the need, new CBP officers are then assigned to a particular port of entry. It takes time to get these people hired and to get them functional. Congress must appropriate the necessary funding to recruit and hire more CBP officers. This human element must not be overlooked. We're talking infrastructure, but this is probably the most important thing. Our ability to keep our trade with the world growing rests on the backs of these individuals. It would be foolish to skimp in this area and create bottlenecks that are within our power to prevent. Creating modern, secure ports of entry also provides security in times of crises. Investing in existing ports of entry and personnel that will allow trade between the U.S. and Mexico is a wise and lucrative investment for our country. For every dollar the federal government invests in port infrastructure and CBP agents, a multiplier effect is created, benefiting the entire U.S. economy. Mexico is our third most important trading partner, and working with our neighbor to modernize ports of entry with new infrastructure, including the latest equipment and technology, creates economic development opportunities, not only for us, but south of the border, which allows Mexican citizens the ability to provide for their families, thus curbing illegal immigration. Madam Chair, Ranking Member, in conclusion, I urge this committee to consider the opportunities that investing in port infrastructure and personnel will bring to our nation and southern partner, and the negative ramifications on trade security by not doing so. Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco, for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Otero to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Torres Small, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today to discuss promoting safe and efficient travel and trade at America's land ports of entry. I currently serve as a logistics manager for TPI Composites, and I'm responsible for the delivering of our products to our customers on a daily basis. TPI is the largest US-based independent manufacturer of composite wind blades in the industry, and it was founded more than 50 years ago. We're currently leading the wind blade manufacturing industry in all North America, Europe, and Asia. Our advanced composites manufacturing technology allows us to build near aerospace-grade parts at industrial prices. TPI's presence in our southern border city, Juarez, Mexico, represent about 45% of our global presence, with 4 facilities that export about 95% of our product to the United States. With such a large portion of our business occurring in TPI Juarez, this project has become a key figure for TPI's future growth. Our designated port of entry to the United States for our oversized loads is Santa Teresa, New Mexico, because it has unique characteristics that make it perfect for our very complicated to transport product. Unfortunately, the port's current infrastructure can accommodate up to our 65-meter blade only. As our blades increase in size, so our logistics challenges. Recently, we are building our 72-meter blade, 262 feet, which the port cannot accommodate. We are expecting this blade to be shipped to the United States in March of 2020. In the last 2 years, we increased our yearly production rate 26%. In 2019, our weekly shipments through Santa Teresa averaged 40 blades per week. In 2020, our volume will continue to increase and we will reach 50 blades on average per week. 12 of those 50 weekly blades will be 72 meters long. Back in September of this year, we were presented the Donations Acceptance Program as an alternative to have the port of entry redesigned as our product required. After a site visit, we assessed the different obstacles that were affecting the safe transit of our product, and since then, we have collaborated with CBP on developing the modifications as the Donations Acceptance Program calls. These modifications are, first, expansion of the port of entry fence line, increasing its opening from 28 to 35 feet long. By expanding the fence line, the tip swing of the blade will clear this obstacle without hitting it. Secondly, we will smooth out the entrance curve by pouring 30,000 square feet of concrete to extend the curve. And the third and last obstacle is a light pole that will relocate to the left side of the lane, where once again, the tip of the blade will hit. The expansion of the port of Santa Teresa will impact directly the economic growth of the region, as commerce is directly tied to the resources that both the port and the region receive. This will allow the port to handle a much larger load, making Santa Teresa a much more attractive port of entry for oversized carriers. Once again, bringing more commerce to the region. As our product gets larger, so will the price tag on each blade, making each piece that crosses through that port much more important for the region. The economic growth will be directly tied to the benefits to the community. As the region becomes more fruitful, so will the benefits and resources that will be allocated in Santa Teresa and this entire region of New Mexico. Thank you for holding this hearing today, and I look forward to hearing any of your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I will remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel, and I'll now recognize myself for questions. So we had a robust discussion about the RSP agreements, which are public-private partnerships that can be used as with ports of entry to expand infrastructure and other investments. Mr. Pacheco, do you see public-private partnerships as a sustainable solution to CBP's staffing and infrastructure shortages? And if so, what's the right balance between public-private investments and federal funding?
Madam Chair, I do. I think it's one of the best things occurred where you can have a company like TPI or in our case over here at the Port of Entry, Dell Computers, which is, they're being manufactured at Foxconn just south of the border, participating in those type of programs. However, there is a bit of pushback by the private sector that say, well, we pay our taxes. Why isn't the federal government, why isn't the state government the entities that are that are pitching in to do this. There is a balance there. I'm not quite sure what it is. I think both sides, the public sector and the private sector, need to have skin in the game. And that's definitely the case here at Santa Teresa. Again, we've been working on the extension of port hours for the better part of 15 years. Gone to Washington several times. We have succeeded in extending the port hours, which closed at 6 o'clock at night for the commercial. We extended that to 8, which was a major thing we had to jump through hoops on. So the 559 program, these type of programs allow us to get there much more quickly. The problem is, again, it's a catch-22, because how can you pay personnel that don't exist overtime? And that's where we are right now.
And I appreciate you bringing that up. I think it's a resounding theme that we've seen in terms of staff shortages. Earlier this year, I held a hearing in the subcommittee on retention and recruitment for CBP officers as well as Border Patrol agents. Going to that staff shortage, can you also just explain the impact that the decreasing in staffing at the port has affected our flow of commerce?
Madam Chair, we went through this past year, and I have to commend the CBP personnel, because they bent over backwards to keep the trade, the flow of trade going. But I guess the question I always ask is, how much more could we have done? You know, because it does affect when CBP has to close a lane in the cargo area, and all of a sudden you're down to one lane, or they have to shut the port down because you know, there's an emergency, or there's a wave of immigrants are coming, or what have you. It really does disrupt our flow of traffic. I've even talked to some people across the border and some people here that say they're reluctant in terms of investing more money, because unless we get these issues settled, you can imagine and appreciate Dell Computer is on a tight supply chain. You order a Dell computer, it's got to be at your house in a certain amount of time. They plan by the minute. And so if we're having these disruptions at the port of entry because of lack of CBP personnel or what have you, it really begs the question, what more could we have done? And where could we have gone in terms of attracting more investment?
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. We've received testimony for this hearing submitted noting that one company plans to or may have to divert some of its shipments, a large portion of its imports, to another port. Have you heard of any other companies that may be having to make these changes based on the insufficient hours?
Madam Chair, I think we're probably referring to the same company. I've heard mostly concern, but that's not good, because we want to provide an environment within our control where commerce can be expanded. We're all about expanding this industrial base. I mean, we can create new jobs, we can create new investment. It ultimately benefits the state, the region, and our country. If we cannot solve these issues with understaffed ports of entry, with insufficient infrastructure. We opened this port of entry originally across the street in 1993, and then the new port of entry in about 98. And we've had a couple of minor injections of infrastructure funding. But this little tiny port of entry, I mean, if you compare it to Nogales, which, oh my God, that's a Taj Mahal of ports of entry at Mariposa. And we're doing more than Nogales. And we're going to hit a point here very quickly that there's no more that you can push through this port of entry because of the infrastructure and because of the CBP personnel.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. Mr. Otero, can you speak to the impacts that that you all suffered due to the increased wait times earlier this year before they were brought down more recently?
Sure. Yeah. The impact that had on TPI's sales was tremendous. Normally, we take advantage of our transportation equipment, and we do 2 rounds a day for all of our blades, since it's limited capacity, our trucking. And during those months, we were only able to do 1 round per day. So, of course, the impact of that in our Juarez operation, there's not enough space for such a large product to be stored in our facilities. There's very limited space in our yards, and that was critical for not just TPI, but also our customers. So they were genuinely concerned about that.
Thank you, Mr. Otero. My time's expired. I now recognize Ranking Member Crenshaw for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here again. Mr. Pacheco, I guess we'll just continue along that same line of questioning, do you ever have do you have an estimate on a dollar amount of, say, lost investment or costs due to inefficient port of entry operations?
Madam Chair, Congressman Crenshaw, that's a very difficult thing to estimate. But I can tell you, we've had companies spooked that we develop a pipeline of prospects that we're trying to recruit. And if they don't come, we always note why they didn't come. And there's some that have cited to me the uncertainty of what's going on at the ports of entry, the migrant crisis, what have you. I would estimate we probably would have gotten closer on 2 to 3 deals. And most of our deals are within the 15 to 30 to $50 million range, if that gives you an idea.
Is that uncertainty, is that just due to border operations? Is that also, is that the USMCA and the uncertainty surrounding that?
Madam Chair, Congressman, all of that. I can tell you with certainty, there were 3 deals that we were looking at in 2018, last year, 2017, 2018, that got spooked. We lost 2 of the deals. One went to El Paso, Texas, which is good. It's for our region. I mean, at least it landed here. But they would have built a building had the USMCA been a little more certain and what have you. That spooked them away. We lost that investment. We lost that physical investment in our industrial base because of that. And that was a pretty healthy deal. That was about 100 jobs.
And you mentioned the migrant crisis too. I mean, you know, it's not as if that's gone away, of course. It's just we have fewer numbers than we did in the springtime. Those were absolute crisis numbers. But the problem still persists. And you brought this up, the issue of amnesty and closing those loopholes and how that affects industry and commerce and certainty. So would you care to expand on that a little bit? And what does the business community feel is the right way to handle these massive amnesty claims?
Well, Madam Chair, Congressman Crenshaw, let me preface this by saying I honestly feel for these families coming up here. I mean, if you're down here, you develop a lot of empathy for people that are desperate like that. It does affect us, as I've testified. It does affect us, and the irony is that asylum seekers just have to set foot on U.S. soil to ask for asylum. Well, you know, if you know anything about the border wall's built on our side of the border. So, you know, I mean, it's a little incongruent in that sense. But I think Congress needs to look at how we treat amnesty cases, how they're processed, because I think maybe we created this own crisis ourselves.
Right. Would you agree that those cases need to be adjudicated quickly and decided quickly so as to not create this incentive of catch and release where all they have to, like you said, all they have to do is show up and step foot on our border and then they're caught and released?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Congressman Crenshaw, yeah, I believe that, because if you go to the other side of the border, there's people waiting months there in shanty towns and shacks and tents. You can go to Chamisal Park and see these poor people out on the coldest day of the year there waiting to get their turn to come. So, yeah, I mean, quickly and fairly.
So I'll bring it back to the donation program, and you know, again, coming from the business community, is that program well known? Is there talk of creative ways to improve upon all of the issues and infrastructure that we see, and using this donation program to do so?
Madam Chair, Congressman Crenshaw, I think it's pretty well known. I mean, we're a very tight industrial base. We have a very active private sector. Our Border Industrial Association serves as the Chamber of Commerce, and sometimes it serves as like the local municipality, because we're not in an incorporated municipality here. We worked very hard several years ago to put the 559 agreement together with Customs. We were getting the state to participate. We got Dell Computer to throw in, because we needed $450,000. Dell was willing to throw in, I think it was $200,000. We were going to get $250,000 out of the state. It didn't work out in that particular legislative session. Then the wheels started rolling, where you had the reassignment of CBP personnel, and at that point, I mean, it was irrelevant. You cannot pay people that are not there.
Yeah, that's a problem that we're still trying to fix. I'm assuming I'm out of time.
Yeah, but we've got time for another round if you're good for that. All right. So just quickly, Mr. Pacheco, will you speak to what you see as the largest infrastructure needs for Santa Teresa Port of Entry?
Madam Chair, when we always have a motto, and our motto is you have to keep infrastructure ahead of development. The day you can't flush your toilets, the day you're not recruiting a new company, okay? And so sometimes I think we get caught up in, okay, we need more water, wastewater, we need higher or expanded electricity, what have you. But we have to take a step back and realize that none of us would be here today, and we'd probably still have 4 businesses, as I saw 29 years ago, if it weren't for this port of entry. And this port of entry is the mouse that roared. It's the little engine that could. I went to Nogales to benchmark what they're doing out there. I've got a buddy that runs their port authority, and he took me on a tour of the port of entry. It's just, if you've never been to the Mariposa port of entry, you got to go. And he wanted to reciprocate and come back here, and I didn't want him to come see our port of entry over here. But we're doing more volume. So the port of entry itself, investing in the infrastructure, it has to be redesigned. Personnel has to be considered here. But if you can see, we've been successful in working with the state, with federal funding, doing all of our roads here in concrete. It's a beautiful, situation we have. But that port of entry is rapidly going to be our bottleneck going forward. So that is the most important piece of the puzzle.
Thank you. Mr. Otero, you testified about the importance of the public-private partnership that you are entering into with CPP. Can you speak specifically to how the timing of that project is essential for your planning needs as a business?
Yes, it has to be done, and we were presented by our local authorities, CPP here back in September, to that, the donations acceptance program. And they are very helpful. It's actually a key element for our business to continue here in this region. And it's moving, not at the speed we would like to. Of course, it's a genuine concern from our customer that is specifically requesting bigger plates ASAP. And it's our only alternative at this point.
That's helpful. And in terms of the spring deadline, what happens if that isn't done then?
We'll start accumulating product our sister city in Southern Juarez.
Thank you. Mr. Pacheco, do you believe that this project will help traffic flow in a more efficient manner and will help attract other businesses?
Madam Chair, definitely. We've always had an arrow in our quiver where we say that locate to Santa Teresa, you're going to locate right nearest the district's fastest crossing port of entry. The minute that we can't say that, the minute we lose our advantage out here. And if you look, we built an industrial base out of sand in the desert here, essentially, right? I mean, technically, should this even be here? We're not here. We're here because of the port of entry. And these type of programs are necessary. And I think we have support at the state level where we could bring the state support to bear to pull some of these projects off. But the redesign of the port of entry and the investment of funds, again, I sound like a broken record, but that's the message I want to get across today. Investment in infrastructure, investment in personnel, you do that. We in the private sector will take it from there and we'll create those jobs and that economic development.
Thank you. Mr. Pacheco, you spoke to how businesses can get spooked by uncertainty. And so I do just want to briefly ask how you feel the passage of USMCA would help address that.
Madam Chair, it's how do you say, essential, critical, paramount. You have to realize we have businesses. We did a deal 4 years ago. It was $100 million. A Turkish company that's is doing copper wire here. They do about 7 million pounds of copper wire a month, if you can imagine how much that is. They invested a lot of money. And I don't think we as a nation can pull the rug out from companies that invested here predicated on some type of an agreement in North America, whether it be NAFTA or USMCA, right? And I would not be able to face them for having attracted them and recruited them here to have their investment be, in limbo. So the passage of the USMCA, is critical, and I hope that it can come up very quickly, and hope we can put that to bed, that issue to bed, because the quicker we can, the quicker we can recruit companies, and the quicker companies that are existing here will expand and start investing more money in their operations.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. My time has expired. I recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Dan Crenshaw, for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Otero, I'll go to you, and I just want to get your general sense of the donation acceptance program, how you found out about it, how you chose to do it, and what improvements could be made to it.
Definitely, probably the getting people to know, or private sectors to know about that. If it wasn't for our very close relationship with the local authorities, probably TPI would not found out about that specific program. That's probably one of my recommendations, that it should be well known, it should be spread out, and as like I mentioned, it's our only alternative right now to continue our business. Unfortunately for us, our technology, it's demanding more.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger, the more efficient. So that's where our customers need, and that's where the environment needs. And so it won't stop here. 72 meters long, it's not the biggest. It'll continue to grow, but it's a genuine concern from our customers. Can you guys do it through Santa Teresa, or do we have to find different routes?
Does the delay in passage of the USMCA affect y'all's business at all?
At this point, it hasn't, because we're going to start shipping this product in March 2020, but it will definitely affect.
You said it will?
It will.
Eventually?
It will.
Okay.
If we
If
don't
it's still not
get
passed.
this clearances, and it's a very formal process that the donations acceptance program calls, that we have to follow those.
Is it too stringent? I mean, could that process be made more flexible? Is that maybe why, as far as I understand it, you're the only company that's actually using it? Maybe, or I guess we mentioned Dell earlier, but very few companies are using it. You know, I wonder what the reason is for that. Is it because it's not that flexible?
I guess there's very few personnel and headquarters that actually have to authorize what we
Okay.
have presented, or there's very key players that have to approve that, that I have not got a response.
Okay. So you're saying that the staffing maybe is inadequate to actually process the applications?
Probably, sir, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Pacheco, I'll go to you on some of those same questions and how it could be improved and what you're seeing.
Sure, Madam Chair, Congressman Crenshaw. I would not say that when we put the R559 agreement in place with CBP that it was a bad experience. They were very helpful. We found ourselves behind the 8 ball several times by being slow on our side to get everything signed and what have you. So I don't think that's it.
Okay.
Again, the biggest feedback I've gotten from companies that you would think would logically want to participate in those programs is, why should I do that if the federal government, I pay taxes, my company's,
Yeah.
whatever. That's the biggest pushback that I
Okay.
get.
Well, you just have them call my office. I'll explain to them why. The last question I want to ask both of you is, so we've talked about infrastructure improvements, but we've been a little bit general with our language. We've obviously identified the need for more personnel. That's a very obvious one. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as just saying, "Hey, we'll authorize more money for it," because that's not the problem. The problem is actually getting people through the process. We have the authorization for the funding, and we're still short. So what else? I mean, specifically, is it more lanes? Is it the technology? Do you find the drive-through NII technology promising? The stuff that we're piloting in Texas. Is that what's required? What's it going to be?
Madam Chair, Congressman Crenshaw, if you look at successful ports of entry, it's a combination of all that you mentioned. It's not just the lanes, okay? It's not just the personnel, it's the technology. And when this port of entry was opened back in 1993, we were the designated pilot port for new technology. And ironically, we were the designated port of entry for hazmat in this region. And I think that's one of the ways that the port got opened way back when Senators Domenici and Bingaman were working on this project. It's a combination of all of that. The hazmat's really important. I can list deals over the years, the last 20 years that we've lost, because the firm could not move product in and out of the port of entry. We worked with TRW back in the day, which was making airbags for cars, and they had argon in their airbags. And that's not a really bad substance, but because we didn't have the personnel, we didn't have the hazmat pit, what have you, we couldn't recruit them. And there's several companies like that we've lost. But it's a combination of all of that. I mean, it's an investment across all those lines.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you so much for your testimony. I deeply appreciate the witness's time and
Thank you.
expertise. Before adjourning, I ask unanimous consent to submit 4 statements for the record. The first is from John Varela, CEO of the Borderplex Alliance. The second is from Anthony Reardon, National President of the National Treasury Employees Union. The third statement is from Dell Technologies, and the final is a priority list of projects developed by industry and CBP for the Santa Teresa Port of Entry. Without objection, so admitted. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, the committee record shall be kept open for 10 days. Hearing no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned.